Something I try to do is respond to comments, because even though I generally don't care for negative comments, like if someone told me to hang myself because I said their favorite show sucks, I honestly wouldn't care. But I do find interesting responses from people who disagree with me, because I do enjoy a good old discussion. Today I'm gonna respond to a few comments from some of my more recent videos. Maybe as time passes, I'll feature ones from really old ones. Anyway, the first comment is from my review of Brian is a Bad Father. Now, although Lance agrees with my opinion on the episode and of Martin Family Guy, where the disagreement lies is my statement that Family Guy shouldn't be held responsible for instructing potential teenagers into committing suicide. So allow me to elaborate on why I feel that way. I am someone who believes that any media or art form should be allowed to express anything. I'm very libertarian when it comes to what people are allowed to say or show, because if we were to dictate what people should or shouldn't depict, unless there's some kind of real life basis that proves direct negative effects from its creation, we run the risk of setting up a dangerous precedent where now anything can be censored merely because some people found that one scene to be distasteful. And here's the thing, I didn't necessarily like the joke myself. I thought it was kinda lame and poorly thought out, but if I were to morally shame the Family Guy staff for writing that joke, it would be the same as me morally shaming La Casa de Papel for potentially encouraging people to rob a bank, or shaming Breaking Bad for teaching people how to produce meth. I mean, it's not like Family Guy is the only source for instructions on how to commit suicide. I mean, if anyone really wanted to learn how to slip the wrist, whether they're suicidal or not, they could probably just search that online. That's why I believe in the data first motto. Come to me with evidence for why Brian is a bad father causes mass suicide, and I'll fully agree with you that the staff should be shamed and held responsible for that reckless joke. Until then, I think everyone should keep their baseless accusations to themselves. The next comment is from a familiar face, Norbert. Now, I'm only really gonna respond to one point he made, which is about the ambiguity of the original creator's opinions on a new adaptation of something they conceived. He used Camp Kroll as an example of a spin-off series where many people are against it under the assumption that Steven Hillenburg wouldn't have approved the spin-off, and that unless we have clear statement from the actual creators that they dislike the projects, we shouldn't be speaking on their behalf and act as if it's something they would be offended by. Now, in the case of Camp Kroll, I mean, we already kind of have evidence that he wouldn't have wanted a spin-off of SpongeBob. I mean, even if he hadn't passed away and Nickelodeon still announced that Camp Kroll would be a thing, I would still believe he wouldn't have wanted it, regardless if he were to make a statement or not. I mean, Nickelodeon does own the property, and I'm sure they made him sign several contracts that prevents him from saying stuff that could damage the reputation. However, even discounting all of that, I don't really care that much about what original creators have to say on this matter, so Best Guy Ever made this point several times on the topic of the Final Fantasy VII remake, because he has been a vocal skeptic over the years, and the common rebuttal he receives is the idea that because the creators of the original game are working on this remake, that inherently makes all the changes justified. Nate argues that they are not the authority on what changes to material are justified or not, because the moment they released the original game decades ago, they lost all right to be the dictator of that, and I feel more or less the same way. Now, I do not believe that the original artists are okay whenever their creations are shittily rebooted, especially when they have no involvement, because that either means that they didn't want to or the studio didn't want them. Either way, the odds of them being okay with the final products are so low that the idea of them approving them is extremely unlikely to me. Even if they were to publicly declare that they approved it, I still would just assume that they were just lying. And even if they're telling the truth, that still wouldn't mean much to me if I think the reboot sucks. If I don't feel like it's doing justice to the original and it's tarnishing its legacy, that's how I'm gonna feel. Now, I might as well respond to another point that Norbert made, which is the sentiment I've also seen expressed on Twitter, which is the problem of reboots not being able to satisfy all fans of the original, because everyone's gonna have their own perspectives, so why even bother trying to make the reboots for them? But here's the thing, this is a very strange logic to propose. I shared this example on Twitter as well. Imagine if a game company decided to develop an arena fighter. Naturally, they're gonna make the game with the intention of appealing to fighting game fans. Now imagine if someone came along and said, oh, some fighting game fans hate arena fighters and prefer traditional 2D fighters, ergo it's pointless to make this game for fighting game fans. That's what I hear whenever I see people making this argument. Like, yeah, of course not every fan is gonna have the same opinion on the reboot regardless if they were made with them in mind or not. Look, every project out there is made with the intention of pleasing a specific demographic. It's not wrong to target certain crowds, and if the possibility of some people not being satisfied was enough of a reason for why their plan should be completely abolished, then almost nothing would get made. Also, when I say that reboots should be made for the original fans, I don't mean the companies should create a fucking survey and tightly construct something based on their demands. I'm more so encouraging these reboots to be made with the heart of a fan of the original. essentially meaning that the people working on it should at least be mildly fanatic and very concerned for the legacy of the original. And whether that will satisfy all original fans or not doesn't matter, because I guarantee you that a large number of those people will appreciate it. That's how I think reboots should be handled, and excuse my skepticism, but I believe a lot of reboots out there are not made that way. I think a lot of them are soullessly made and are just trying to bank on the brand recognition and capitalize on the newer market. But hey, that's just how my mind operates. I'm kind of a cynical person and don't trust most companies. I don't know, I feel like a lot of people, especially in the cartoon community, want to be hopeful about this kind of stuff. They want to look at these clearly corporate decisions as positively as they can, in the off chance that there might be something good coming out of it. But I don't think that way. I'm very upfront and cautious because I've seen enough bad treatment of beloved properties that I feel earned my skepticism. But anyway, I think that's all I have to say on this subject. Old good, new bad. The last comment is from my serialized versus episodic cartoons video. Now, to be honest, I don't really disagree with this comment. I just wanted to reply to one specific point, that serialized cartoons are trying to be the next Avatar. I found this to be a very fascinating analogy, and it really helped me understand where this whole resentment towards serialized cartoons comes from. Now, I have a Twitter, in case you weren't aware, and most of the time I'm just posting Yakuza memes, worshipping waifus, making some sarcastic comments every now and then, but I also reply and quote tweet in response to what others have to say, and I've had my fair share of conversations in regards to the whole episodic versus serialized cartoons. And I think with the Avatar observation, I finally came to understand my disconnect with a lot of people. Now, this is something that's probably gonna rub people the wrong way, maybe even piss some people off, but I'm just gonna say it. I think a lot of these people who've been opposed to the serialized craze, they don't watch a ton of stuff besides Western cartoons. It's either that or they just don't take it into account for some reason. That's why Avatar is such a common thing to be brought up when discussing what these new serialized cartoons are trying to be, because there aren't a ton of cartoons with lore and serialization, or at least not as recognizable as Avatar. But with me, I take various different serialized content from other mediums into account, to the point where to these people, because for the past decades, Western cartoons have been mostly constructed to be episodic, and that's what has been embedded into people's subconscious, to the point where when you reach a decade where animation studios are not allowing for more serialized cartoons to be made than before, they see this as a trend. But to me, this is kind of standard. In fact, I recently read a post from Craig McCracken where he expressed how he wished he could implement more continuity and serialization to Wonder Over Yonder, but he couldn't do much because Disney wanted it to be more episodic. If anything, I think Western animation today faced the problem of having shows that aren't serialized enough. I mean, a lot of the stuff that people deem as riddled with continuity, I don't think they're that serialized. A lot of them have large number of self-contained episodes before they get back to the main overarching plot, to the point where not only does it feel like they're wasting time in some cases, but it also ends up not coming off as that different from any other episodic cartoon. I mean, with Star Versus, like, yeah, sure, it has continuity and lore, but honestly, it's entry tier. Not that I'm surprised, it's a kids show, so of course they're gonna try their best not to overwhelm their audiences, but regardless, as someone who enjoys expanded series with history and ongoing plots, Western cartoons don't do that much for me on that regard. So I don't think the solution is to return to making mostly episodic cartoons, especially since we already have that. Pay attention to most of the stuff that gets released and you'll realize that episodic shows still dominate the market. The problem is that you're focusing on what the popular figures in the community are talking about. Maybe you should start branching out and finding your niche. My Twitter mutual Kylie constantly shares cartoons that aren't majorly popular but appeal to her personally. She found her own niche and is now just indulging in it. Maybe you should take some advice from her and grow to be independent from what the populace are aiming their attentions at. As a last note, and this isn't really something that applies to everyone, in fact a lot of the people that I've talked to on this subject don't really have this problem. This is more so geared towards the really extreme cases of people who have a fucking vendetta against serialized cartoons, because honestly I think the real problem with these people is either really boxed and closed-minded mentality or poor exposure. There's a series called Somali Tomori no Kami-sama that was released this year. It's 12 episodes long, so you don't have to dive into a sea of episodes. It's continuity driven and has a decent amount of history behind its story. Once you watch that and realize how fucking good it is, unless you have shitty taste, you'll get a better understanding of where I'm coming from, and why I have such a strong urge to defend the push for serialization in cartoons, because stuff like Somali is abundant in other mediums. I don't see live action media fans complaining that serialized shows get too much attention. This only seems to be a Western animation thing, and it's baffling. The only logical explanation I can think of is that they don't have enough perspective on this, so I have to encourage them to seek that out. Anyway, I did not write this part on my script. Follow Twitter, pay me on Patreon, I don't fucking know, leave me alone.